There are places in this country where the forest swallowed something whole and never gave it back. Not a person, not a family, something larger than that, an entire way of living, a set of rules that had no name in any law book, no parallel in any court record, no equivalent in anything the outside world would recognize as human society. Something that grew in the dark over decades and became so complete, so self-contained, so sealed from the correcting pressure of civilization, that by the time anyone from the outside world finally entered it, what they found could not be fully described in the language available to them. Devil's Den is a real place. If you drive to Washington County in northwestern Arkansas today, you will find a state park bearing that name, hiking trails, a picnic area, a creek that runs cold and clear over limestone shelves. Families bring their children there. People photograph the rock formations in the golden light of late afternoon and post the pictures and drive home. They do not know what was found in those woods in 1881. Most of them never will, because what happened in the forest above Devil's Den in the decade between 1871 and 1881 was documented in one set of records, partially destroyed, partially sealed, and then distributed across 3 separate county archives in a way that has made it nearly impossible for any single researcher to assemble the full picture. I have spent a long time assembling it. Before we go any further, drop your location in the comments below. Tell me where you are watching from and what time it is there, because this story does not stay in Arkansas. It follows you. Washington County, Arkansas in 1871 was a place still bleeding from the Civil War. The Ozark Plateau in the northwestern corner of the state had been contested ground. Throughout the conflict, irregular forces, guerrilla raids, farms burned and rebuilt and burned again. By the time formal hostilities ended, large sections of the forested hill country had been abandoned. Families who had fled the violence had not all returned. Properties sat empty. Timber tracts went unclaimed. The machinery of county government was reconstructing itself from near nothing, and its reach into the remote hill hollows was, at best, occasional. The topography above the natural rock formation locals had long called the Devil, a labyrinth of sandstone bluffs and boulder fields fed by a cold creek running down through thick mixed timber, was not on any reliable survey map as of 1870. The county tax rolls showed no assessed property in that section. No road ran into it. No church held members from it. For administrative purposes, that stretch of forest did not contain anyone. It did. The man who had moved his family into the timber above Devil's Den sometime around 1867 or 1868 was known in the limited record by a single name, Harp. Whether this was a surname, a given name, or a name adopted for obscurity is not established anywhere in the documentation. The county circuit court records from the 1881 proceedings refer to him consistently as the man Harp. Never as Mr., never with a first name, never with any stated origin. A notation in the margin of one court document, written by the circuit clerk and not attributed to any testimony, reads, "No one claims to have known him before the hills." What is documented is what he built in those woods over the course of roughly a decade. Harp was described by the 2 individuals who gave testimony about him in 1881 as tall, well over 6 feet, with a build that had grown heavy not from ease but from the specific physical labor of the hill country. The hauling, the splitting, the carrying of everything a family needed through terrain that offered no mechanical assistance of any kind. His hands were described as enormous. His face was described by a Washington County deputy named Ellis Croft, who saw him in person, as a face that had been a long time without mercy in it. He was believed to be in his mid-50s by 1881. He had arrived in those hills with a woman and at least 2 children. By 1881, the population living under his authority in the timber above Devil's Den had grown to somewhere between 11 and 17 individuals, depending on which account is used. The precise number was never established. Some of those individuals were never found. For the first years, the family, if that word applies, had no contact with the surrounding county at all. They were entirely self-sufficient. They hunted. They grew what they could in small clearings. They had no need to come down to the settlements, and so they did not. The first indication that something in that timber required attention came in the autumn of 1874 from a source no one would have expected to report it. A circuit preacher named Olin Marsh, traveling his regular route through Washington County in October of 1874, stopped for the night at a farmstead near the base of the ridge below Devil's Den. The family who kept that farmstead, a widow named Sarah Turnbow and her 3 grown sons, offered him supper and a bed, which was common practice on preacher circuits throughout the Ozark Hill country at that time. According to Marsh's journal, held today in the special collections of the University of Arkansas Library in Fayetteville, where it was donated by his great-grandson in 1952, over supper that evening, the eldest Turnbow son, a man named Gideon, told the preacher something he said he had been wanting to tell a man of God for some time. Gideon Turnbow said that the previous winter, one of his cattle had strayed up into the timber above the ridge. He had followed the trail several miles before he found the animal. On the way back down in failing light, he had passed close to a clearing he had not known was there. In the clearing, he had seen firelight. He had seen figures moving around it, more figures than he expected to find in that uninhabited country. He had stopped and watched for a moment before the animal pulled him on. What he told Preacher Marsh he had seen in that clearing, in the light of that fire, was described in Marsh's journal in language that suggests the preacher was disturbed enough by it to record it with unusual specificity. Marsh wrote that Gideon Turnbow described a ceremony of some kind, a group of individuals arranged in a pattern around the fire, performing repeated physical movements in unison, with a single figure at the center, directing the movements by voice. Marsh wrote, he said the words being spoken were not English. He said the figure at the center was the largest man he had ever seen in his life. He said none of them looked at him. He said he believed that was the only reason he left that clearing alive. Marsh noted that he had prayed with the Turnbow family that evening and departed the following morning. He noted that he had said nothing to anyone in the county about what Gideon Turnbow told him. He explained this decision in one sentence. I did not know what I would have said. Nobody reported anything to the Washington County Sheriff's Office. Not then. And then came the spring of 1878 and the matter of Rufus Clay. Rufus Clay was a 26-year-old man from Fayetteville who worked as an apprentice surveyor for a land company that was beginning to assess timber tracts in Washington County for potential commercial cutting. His employer, the Crawford and Bell Timber Company, sent him into the hill country above the Devil's Den Formation in April of 1878 to run preliminary boundary lines on an unclaimed parcel. He left Fayetteville on April 9, 1878. He had told his landlady he would return within 10 days. He did not return. His employer made inquiries. The Washington County Sheriff's Office dispatched a deputy to the area in mid-May, 5 weeks after Clay's departure. The deputy found Clay's survey equipment abandoned on a rock shelf above the creek, approximately 2 miles into the timber above Devil's Den. The equipment was undamaged. Clay's field notebook was with the equipment. His last entry was dated April 11th. It described the terrain he was traversing and noted, in the final line of the entry, that he had observed what appeared to be a structure through the timber to the north of his position and intended to investigate in case it represented an occupied property that would affect the survey boundaries. There was no entry after that. The deputy filed a report with the sheriff. The report noted the abandoned equipment and the field notebook. It noted that no further trace of Rufus Clay had been found. It recommended that a more thorough search be organized. According to the Washington County Sheriff's records, which are housed at the Arkansas State Archives in Little Rock, no organized search was ever conducted. The Crawford and Bell Timber Company received the deputy's report and withdrew their survey claim on that particular parcel. Their internal correspondence, discovered when the company's records were donated to the University of Arkansas in 1971, includes a letter from the company's senior partner to its surveying superintendent, dated June 1878. The letter is 3 sentences long. The final sentence reads, "We will not be sending anyone else into that section of timber." Nobody in the county pressed the matter. Rufus Clay was from Fayetteville. He had no family in Washington County to demand answers on his behalf. He was noted as missing in the county records. He was not found. But here is the thing about a family living in the deep timber of an Ozark hill, hollow with no law and no record and no accounting to anyone in the outside world. They eventually need something they cannot grow or make or take from the forest. In the late summer of 1879, a woman appeared at a general store in a small community called Cane Hill, approximately 12 miles south of the Devil's Den Formation. She was described by the store owner, a man named Aldous Gregg, in a statement he gave to the sheriff in 1881, as being somewhere between 25 and 40 years of age. Gregg said he could not be more precise because the woman's face was in a condition that made her age difficult to judge. She was thin beyond what Gregg had seen in even the leanest of hill families. Her clothing was described as rough sewn from material that did not resemble any fabric Gregg recognized. She did not speak to him directly. She placed 3 items on the counter: a small quantity of dried herbs, a carved wooden figure of a kind Gregg could not identify, and a piece of worked leather, and pointed at a bolt of wool cloth on the shelf behind him. Gregg said he gave her the cloth. He said he did not ask her where she was from. He said later that he had not asked because something about the encounter had made him, in his words, not want to know the answer. He watched her leave. He watched her walk north up the road toward the ridge. 2 days later, she came back. This time she was not alone. The second individual was a boy. Greg estimated him at 12 to 14 years of age. He was carrying something wrapped in burlap. He did not speak. He stood near the door while the woman conducted a second exchange, this time trading the contents of the burlap bundle, which Greg said he did not examine closely, for a quantity of salt and a small amount of rendered fat. Before they left, Greg said, the boy turned and looked at him directly. Just once briefly, Greg included this detail in his statement to the sheriff. He said it was the detail he had thought about most in the 2 years since it happened. He said the boy's expression was not frightened, not hostile, not curious. He said he had thought for a long time about the right word for it, and the word he had settled on was ancient, he said. The boy looked at him the way a very old man looks at something he has long since ceased to find surprising. He said he did not sleep that night. The investigation that finally entered the timber above Devil's Den came in October of 1881, and it came because of a woman who walked out. Her name in the court record is given only as Della. No surname is recorded anywhere in the official documentation, and no researcher since has been able to establish one with certainty. She was found on the road near Canehill in the second week of October by a farm family named Sutton, who brought her to the town of Fayetteville in their wagon. She was in a serious physical condition. She was treated by a physician named Dr. Horace Warfield, whose case notes survive in the Washington County medical records held at the state archives. Warfield's notes are clinical and precise. They describe injuries consistent with, in his language, prolonged and systematic physical correction of an extreme nature. They describe evidence of malnutrition extending over a period of years. They describe scarring that Warfield assessed as being of various ages, the oldest of which he estimated as dating back at least a decade. Warfield also noted, in a separate section of his case record that he labeled statements, that Della had spoken to him at length over the course of several days of treatment. He had recorded what she said as accurately as he could. Warfield's statement record was the document that sent the Washington County Sheriff, a man named Albert Creed, into those hills. Creed organized a party of 7 men, 4 deputies and 3 civilian volunteers, and entered the timber above Devil's Den on October 19, 1881. He left a sealed account of what he found with the circuit court clerk in Fayetteville before he made the journey, with instructions to open it if he did not return. He returned. But the account he left and the formal report he filed afterward together constitute the primary documentary record of what existed in that clearing. The trail they followed was not hidden. That was the first thing Creed noted in his report. It was a deliberate, maintained path, rocks moved, branches cleared, the creek crossing reinforced with laid timber. Someone had made it easy to find. Whether that was meant as invitation or arrogance or something else, Creed did not speculate. They heard the encampment before they saw it. The sound was described by Creed as a low and continuous voice, one voice speaking without pause. As they emerged from the timber into the clearing, the voice stopped. What they found in the clearing was a compound of 7 structures, not cabins, structures built from timber and stone in forms that did not match the standard construction of any dwelling. Creed or his deputies recognized from their experience in the hill country. The largest structure was central. The others were arranged around it in a deliberate pattern that Creed's report described with visible discomfort as not accidental in its arrangement. There were 9 people in the clearing when the sheriff's party arrived. They did not flee. They did not speak. They stood in positions distributed around the central structure and watched the incoming men with the same flat, unreadable attention that Ellis Croft had described in Harp's face years later. Harp himself was in the doorway of the central structure. He did not move when the sheriff entered the clearing. He looked at Creed for a long time. Then he stepped aside. Creed entered the central structure. What he found inside was inventoried in his formal report in short sequential sentences, each one describing a single object or condition. The inventory runs to 41 items. Many of those items are described in terms that indicate Creed did not have adequate language for what he was looking at. He used the phrase of unknown purpose 11 times in 41 entries. Among the items that are clearly identifiable in the report, the personal effects of Rufus Clay, the missing surveyor from 1878, his field compass, a personal letter addressed to him at his Fayetteville lodging, his boots. Rufus Clay was not in the structure. Rufus Clay was not found anywhere in the compound or the surrounding timber during the search conducted that day, and over the following 3 days he has never been found. Harp was taken into custody and transported to Fayetteville. The 9 individuals in the clearing were taken as well. Of the 9, 2 gave testimony in the subsequent circuit court proceedings. The others refused to speak to any representative of the court at any point during the proceedings. One of them, a man whose age was estimated at somewhere between 30 and 50, was reported by the jailkeeper to have spent the entirety of his detention standing in the corner of his cell facing the wall, speaking in a low, continuous voice at all hours of the day and night. The jailkeeper's written log, filed as an exhibit in the court proceedings, describes a 14-day period during which this individual did not eat, did not sleep by any observable measure, and did not once turn away from the wall. He was released after the proceedings concluded due to insufficient evidence of specific criminal acts. He walked north on the road out of Fayetteville. He was not followed. He was not seen again in the county record. Harp was held on multiple charges arising from Della's testimony and from the evidence collected at the compound. The circuit court proceedings from November and December of 1881 were conducted with a partial seal on testimony. The circuit judge, whose name was Josiah Pendergraft, ruled that certain elements of the witness statements were not suitable for public record in a form that would allow full reproduction in the newspapers. The Fayetteville Democrat covered the proceedings but printed, by its own editorial acknowledgement, only a portion of what it heard. What the newspaper did print in its November 14, 1881 edition was enough to generate correspondence from readers across the state. The paper's editor published a response the following week in which he described the case as the most disturbing series of events this publication has been asked to account for in its history of covering this county. Harp was convicted on 2 counts and sentenced to 20 years in the Arkansas State Penitentiary. He died there in 1889, 8 years into his sentence, of an illness described in the prison physician's records as a fever of unknown origin that resisted all treatment and ran its course in 11 days. He never spoke publicly about what had taken place in the timber above Devil's Den, and no statement from him survives in any archive accessible to researchers. The compound was burned by the sheriff's order on October 23, 1881. 3 deputies who participated in the burning gave brief statements afterward, noting that the fire behaved strangely, that it took longer than expected to catch in the large central structure, and that the smoke produced by that structure was dark and thick in a way inconsistent with the timber from which it was built. Those statements were filed as supplementary exhibits. They have not been reproduced in any published account of the case before this one. Today, Devil's Den State Park in Washington County receives hundreds of thousands of visitors every year. The hiking trails are well maintained. The creek is clean. The rock formations, the actual Devil's Den crevices in the sandstone bluffs, are a beloved natural feature of the Arkansas Ozarks and appear in countless photographs. The section of timber above the park on the ridge north of the main formation is not part of the state park. It is unincorporated forest land. There are no trails into it on any official map. The state park's own published materials make no reference to the history of that section of timber. When a graduate student in history at the University of Arkansas researched this case in 2004 and wrote to the State Parks Division asking whether interpretive materials addressing the 1881 events could be considered for the park, she received a 1-paragraph response noting that the events she referenced occurred outside park boundaries and were therefore outside the scope of park interpretation. There are no boundary markers on the ridge. There is no signage. There is nothing to indicate to anyone who walks north from the main park trails into the upper timber that they are approaching the location of something that a Washington County judge ruled too disturbing to enter fully into the public record in 1881. There is only the timber and the quiet, and if the accounts of certain visitors over the years are to be credited, an occasional sound from somewhere in the trees above, low, rhythmic, continuous, that stops exactly when you stop to listen for it. Here is what I cannot stop returning to in all the time I have spent with this case. Harp built something in those woods that lasted for more than a decade. He built it in a place where no law reached, where no church reached, where no neighbor could see it, and the thing he built was not simply violence, though violence was part of it. It was an entire system, a complete alternative to every social structure that the surrounding civilization had developed. Its own rules, its own language, its own ceremonies, its own way of marking and measuring human beings. The question in this case, Forces, is not simply about a man who did terrible things in the woods. It is about what human beings become when every external corrective is removed. When there is no law, no neighbor, no account to be given to anyone outside the walls you have built. When isolation is not just a condition but a tool deliberately maintained. Do you believe that what happened above Devil's Den was the product of one uniquely evil man who would have done what he did anywhere? Or do you believe that the forest made it possible, that the isolation was not just the setting but the cause, that given enough time, enough distance from the correcting pressure of civilization, something like this becomes not just possible but inevitable? I have thought about that question for a long time. I do not have a comfortable answer. I am not sure one exists. This case has stayed with me longer than almost anything I have covered, not because of the violence, though that is real and documented and deserves to be acknowledged directly, but because of the 9 people standing, silent in that clearing, because of the man facing the wall for 14 days, because of whatever Rufus Clay walked toward in the timber on April 11th, 1878, and never walked away from. Some histories are buried because they are too complicated for easy telling, and some are buried because the people responsible for recording them looked at what they had found and made a quiet decision to say as little as possible. Tell me in the comments, do you think this was one evil man, or do you think the isolation itself was the monster? I want to know where you land on that. Drop it below. If this took you somewhere dark and you want to keep following these buried histories, the ones that the records tried to lose and mostly succeeded, subscribe and ring the bell. There are more of them. They do not get easier to read, but they are real. The timber above Devil's Den is still there. The ground has never been examined. Stay out of the woods.